Okay, as usual, here I am again, because the first time I did mute myself. Okay, so let's do it again. I saw the discussion today on Twitter about the apparently two different autopsy results in that case. And when I was listening to the family's lawyer, I was a bit outraged as well, and I couldn't really understand why no one is getting charged. But then I read through the whole autopsy report, and I will talk you through it because it does actually make a lot of sense. And probably everyone will understand in the end why it's so hard to charge anyone in this case. Okay, so what I used was the second autopsy report from the medical examiner in the US, and she gave us a rough description about what happened. So it was reported that was basically she drank a lot of alcohol in the night before, and she also mentions the assault video, and apparently it happened around 7 o'clock in the morning. It was the cell phone video which we've seen. Then after that, it's only reported that she went back to her room, and we don't really know about anything about her condition or anything until she was discovered shortly before noon, face down on the bathroom floor by housekeeping, and they called her friends. And around 2 o'clock, then the friends requested a doctor and said she was probably completely dehydrated and after all the drinking. Around 3 o'clock, the doctor tried to give her an IV, and it seemed to be clearly that she was dehydrated. But then she already got convulsive crisis, so like cramps and everything. And then she went in a complete cardiac arrest and cardiopulmonary arrest at 4:49. And then they spent a long amount of time. It's like I think they shocked her 6 times and stuff. And they really gave her also a lot of medication when I read through it. But at the end of the day, then they decided it doesn't work, and she was pronounced dead at 5:57. Okay. Now let's have a look at the autopsy report itself. So the first thing what threw me off a bit was they found several areas of linear abrasions. So from abdomen, pelvis, then the insides of the thighs, the legs and the lower arms and those kind of things. So linear is actually, it looks a bit more like self-inflicted, like cutting injuries. And some of them weren't even fresh, some of them were also scars. So just seemed to indicate a bit of an issue there. But she also had some abrasions on like hip bone and stuff. But I mean, I was thinking about it. Maybe when they've been in the pool and you try to get in and out of the pool and you can just scratch yourself a bit. So that seems probably has nothing to do with anything major in that case. Then, yeah, the big bruise on the forehead, and I explained to you what that actually means. This is usually what you get with children a bit more when you fall, and it's like I have a horn or something on the forehead. So it's just accumulation of blood underneath here, and then it just swells out. You see that a lot more often in children actually um, than in adults because it's just more protected, more solid. But that's what they found, and then so what this means is basically you have some, when the white in your eye can get red sometimes from when you're diving too much in a pool with a lot of chlorix and stuff. So you can have this type of things, but it was also important that they mention it because when someone gets strangled, for example, because of the pressure, the tiny veins in the white of the eye, they can also burst in and you get like blood shot in it. So, okay, but they mentioned that one. Then as they went through the whole autopsy, they found, here is mentioned the dura. So I gave you here the overview. The dura is basically one of the skins protecting the brain. So if you the dura mater, and it's the outmost layer of the skins that protects your whole brain and spinal cord. And there they found a small amount of crumbly reddish blood material, and the posterior fossa. So you have the three parts of the skull. It's like the front, the middle, and then posterior is here. Okay, so they found a tiny amount of blood, but not much, because at first her symptoms would also aligned with someone who has a brain bleeding or a brain swelling, but it wasn't the case. Okay, what they then did was they looked at all the organs, and there's no evidence of any other trauma or disease. The only thing they found, and this is the lower trachea and bilateral bronchi. So bilateral is usually means on both sides. What you have here, this is where you, so basically it connects your lungs and how you breathe. And then you have the bronchi here. So they found in this section um, crumbly blood-like material and food. So it looks more like if someone is vomited and then they breathe it in. They later on analyzed it, so it seems to be, I think, a piece of meat or something. It's just like, it seems like more like food that was thrown up, and her stomach was completely empty. So that does actually make sense. Why the stomach was empty, so she must have been vomited somewhere. Then, okay, so what they did here was they checked the whole posterior section. So I gave you here an overview from your spine, spinal cord, and everything. So they found no evidence of hemorrhage, disruption, not even the muscle ligaments or anything, which is interesting. Again, no fractures, nothing. And this is also here, there's no evidence of the dislocation. So what they initially thought in Mexico was that she has basically like a broken neck, so a dislocation. This would be around here, actually. But as they then had a closer look here, so that wasn't the case. Okay. The more interesting part from here was actually she got beaten up, but she didn't develop any bruising. Like usually it can still develop, and you would see it a bit later on, but this probably wasn't also wasn't mentioned in the first report. Okay, then what I have here, I have the whole toxicology report in the end, but they tested for any drug available. There was nothing, and regarding alcohol, so they did testings, but it came back negative. Then, of course, blood or urine or anything was not available anymore because she was embalmed. And then she actually explains her findings. So the cause of death in this case is undetermined. The most significant findings is the bruising on the forehead. Then you have this tiny, tiny blood thing what they found in the brain, and she had a hypoxic ischemic brain injury, which is basically your brain doesn't get enough oxygen. Then she says the hematome in the forehead is consistent with a blunt force trauma. I did check out the video again where they were fighting. I mean, there were some blows to the head as well, but usually to get something like this and that extent is usually an object and not the hand or the fist or something. It's like as if you, I don't know, you fall and you hit your head on a sink or something. It makes sense. Okay, and yeah, this is then the next issue. What we have with this whole autopsy report is the hypoxic ischemic brain damage. This is actually consistent with several hours of, so when you're alive for several hours, but your breathing is insufficient and your brain doesn't get enough oxygen. Okay. And it can also happen during CPR when you don't get enough oxygen. But in that case, it seems to be a bigger issue. So they concluded it must have been over several hours. Then she also explains there were no findings of any other type of brain bleeding. And also, what is with the herniage means is you can have parts of the brain swell and then they compress other parts, but they also checked for that. So there was just absolutely nothing. And the brain was also separately sent off to neuropathology, and they had a complete check on the brain, and there was just nothing abnormal or anything which would raise red flags. And this part here that actually explains why we've heard from Mexico she had a broken neck, and then we've heard she didn't have a broken neck. which meant the limited nature of the prior examination, the spinal cord and the cervical vertebra and the ligaments were not directly visualized to confirm the suspected sublocation, which means I assume the pathologist in Mexico probably thought, well, the US will do their own autopsy anyway, so they didn't take it all apart. They just said, this is what we think, but it didn't take it completely out to actually confirm it. But then in the US they did, and then they found there is no broken neck or anything. So they basically just clarified that. Then regarding the alcohol, she also mentions that so the time frame actually between the assault. So the assault was somewhere around 7 in the morning, and then the time of death was roughly 10.5 hours later. This would be more than enough time for a body to metabolize the alcohol, so that goes down to zero again. And we don't know if she drank anything during the day, but when she must have thrown up at some point, so it makes sense why the alcohol level would be down again. Then the other part is, so when they mentioned the part of the concussion, so usually when you have a concussion, you can be a bit like irritated and a bit like confused in this after you had a concussion, but it's not really known in what type of state she was, because she went just to her bedroom. Yeah, we don't have much information about anything else, so we don't know if she was confused or anything like that. Then, yeah, so the only thing we know is that she was able to go back to her bedroom or the bathroom, and th- this is then actually the important part, because we don't know if she, for example, was still drunk, walked in the bathroom because she needed to vomit, and fell because she was drunk and hit her head on the sink or something, or maybe she went in the bathroom, fell because of concussion, and hit her head. So you can't really conclude where this bruise is actually coming from in the end, and this makes it just so much harder. Um, the problem is that usually you would hope that you can have a full report or like pictures or something, or someone says, oh, I saw on the sink on the corner there was a bit blood or something, that you could conclude a bit more, but we don't have that. Then we only know that roughly 4 hours she was lying on the floor. At least that's what's assumed. And you have the issue with, so post-concussion apnea is that some people, they breathe very insufficient when they have had a concussion. So this could also contribute to this brain injury because of the lack of oxygen. Yeah, she said, okay, she never made it to hospital before her death. And the other part is when you have someone who was heavily drunk and lost a lot of fluids, the electrolytes can be thrown off, and that can also lead to a cardiac arrest, which is very hard actually to handle because you can't really test outside like what are the electrolytes level or anything. So you can't really do much about it. And yeah, okay, then here we go. So then she concluded it's the contribution to the death is unknown. So she can't even make a conclusion of how much something might have contributed to the death. And this is the full toxicology report. So they literally tested for everything on the planet, like even some stuff like ketamine and stuff, which is not so easy to trace back afterwards after a certain amount of time. But they managed to test it all. And ironically, in all the testing, they forgot to actually list alcohol. But then you can see here they had a video conference, and it was confirmed. So they tested for alcohol. There were no results. Like nothing was found, and it was negative. Okay, so but she explained why it might have happened. So when you look at all of the things, the major parts what you had was the bruise on the forehead, which is not a cause of death. You had this tiny bit of blood found, but which is not enough to contribute to a death or anything. It was more concussion. You had vomit on both sides of the lungs, or in the bronchi, which is also not a leading cause of death. I wonder if they took her blood sugar. I couldn't find any note on that one because that would be the other part, maybe the blood sugar. But usually during CPR, they should do a blood sugar just to see if that might be a contributing factor. So they should have checked that. But yeah, so basically, from what you can see, is there's no specific cause of death, and all of these things on their own don't make any sense to cause the death of a young woman. So it's very hard to charge someone with anything when you can't even prove what she died of. And even that we have the video where she gets beaten up, but I mean, you could, yeah, no, you can't even say that. So you can't even say regarding the concussion and stuff. You can't even say for sure that that happened during the fight because it could have also happened when she fell in the bathroom. So it all comes back to what can you really pinpoint back to one specific incident, and in that case, it just seems you can't, and that's why no one gets charged. But at least we have clarity why there are two different results in the autopsy.